Many tourists to North Korea will feel the need to travel back in time as they enter their hotel. The unique architecture and design of the 1970s in Pyongyang hotels has now been documented in a new book that offers a very rare glimpse into North Korean culture, writes the BBC's Julie Lee. Authorities are keeping a close eye on tourists visiting North Korea. The country's tourism industry is controlled by the state, and government tour guides oversee tourists. They are only allowed access to approved places, which means all tourists travel the same. But last spring, Australian photographers James Scullin and Nicole Reid spent 5 nights in the capital, Pyongyang, spending time in 11 hotels and publishing a book called Hotels of Pyongyang. James Scullin is a tour guide and has visited Pyongyang 8 times. He told the BBC that hotels are biased places where visitors are not strictly monitored according to the rules. Their architecture and design tell of a country that is largely closed to the world but still entertains tourists. All North Korean hotels are government-sponsored, so there is little publicity. "It's really weird because we're so used to it," says Scullin. "It's part of our lives. It amazes me what our country was like before Dina spread." In fact, they call the hotels well-preserved relics of old times. Most were built by East Germany and the Soviet Union in the 1970s and 1980s after much of the city was destroyed by the Korean War. Scullin says his influence is still evident in hotel architecture and design. Who goes here? Given that North Korea is largely isolated from the rest of the world, many would expect hotels to be empty and deserted. But when Mr. Scullin and Mr. Reid visited last year, they found out that was not the case. The hotels were full of tourists, almost all of them from China. "Our pictures do give the impression that the hotels are deserted, but that's not true," says Scullin. "The hotels were full. When you are a tourist in North Korea, you get up at 8 in the morning and take a bus to see the museums and monuments. You can't sleep or stay in a hotel because you are on a guided tour. Our project was great because we had personal guides and we only traveled from one hotel to another." He recalls that tourism in North Korea was booming before the outbreak of COVID-19. It is estimated that about 100,000 tourists come here each year, most of them Chinese. The number of non-Chinese tourists in the same period is estimated to be between 8 and 10,000. Mr. Scullin says all the Chinese tourists he met had the same reason for coming to North Korea, and that was that it reminded him of China in the 1970s. By visiting North Korea, they are definitely visiting their history. Many people from East Germany, Russia and the former East come here for similar reasons. Westerners like us go here because it's very different. How are the hotels? Hotels have bars and swimming pools, although rooms do not have Wi-Fi service. In fact, the tourism infrastructure here is decades old and not what most international tourists expect. But although exterior buildings look solid and uniform, interior designs can be colorful and varied. An example of this is the Bureo Hotel, which has a karaoke room, which gives the impression of 70s, says Scullin. "It's interesting because it's very different from this country," he explained. "And it's interesting to imagine who designed it. Because this person probably never went to the West or Japan, which means that this strange-looking room was completely out of his imagination. So I think this expression of creativity uniqueness is also possible in North Korea, which is not the most conducive country for creativity."